Let's dive into supports. This is one of our bread and butters of 3D printing. First, let's learn, when do we need to add supports? There's going to be two features on your part that require supports, and that is overhangs and bridges. Overhangs are best described as the arms of a Y and T shape as they overhang the previous layers. Now, not every overhang needs a support. They only become an issue when they overhang too much. A good rule of thumb is that you need to support your overhangs when the angle they make with the Z-axis is greater than 45 degrees. So if we took our Y and T shapes here, the Y is less than 45 degrees from the vertical, so it would be fine to print without supports. But this T here is much larger than 45 degrees, so we're going to need to support it. The other situation is when your part has bridges, and this is best described when looking at the letter H, that little bridge bit in the middle. Like overhangs, bridges aren't always an issue, as most printers can bridge a short distance. But the rule of thumb is if the bridge is more than 10 or 20 millimeters, it's gonna need supports. Let's now generate some supports in Prusa Slicer, but we're gonna do a bit more of an advanced job than just clicking everywhere. Here's our part, and like before, we're gonna hit generate everywhere and slice it up. And when we do this, Prusa Slicer is automatically gonna look for high angle overhangs and any bridges that are too long, and it'll apply supports according to this criteria. However, the default settings have generated too many supports for this part, so we're going to go in and fix it. At the top here, we're meant to slide a little nut into this square cutout so we can put a bolt through here and tighten it down. And as you can see with default support settings, it has filled this cutout in everywhere. And this is going to be a pain to remove, and once you've even removed it, there's going to be so much leftover material in there that you're going to struggle to get the nut inside of it. So under supports, we're going to select support on build plate only. And as you expected, the slicer is only going to generate supports on the base plate. So our top here is untouched, but our big overhang here is nice and supported. Now there is a third way to add supports manually in Prusa Slicer, and it's a bit situational, but there might be times where you need it, so we're going to show you how to do it. So under supports, we're going to hit support enforcers only. And if we slice now, it's not going to generate any supports. And that's because we need to manually add them to our part. So we'll select the model, right click, and then hit add support enforcer. You have a few geometries that you can use, but we're just going to be using the box for now. So whatever part of our STL intersects with this enforcer block, Prusa Slicer is going to generate supports for it. So we can drag it around and then scale it to what we need, and I'm just going to support our bottom overhang here for now. And if we hit slice, we can see that it gives us pretty much what we had before, but we've actually manually chosen these supports. And just to flex our prowess of enforcers, we can partially support this overhang. This print would fail because it needs the supports. This is just a demonstration. Now there are some downsides to using supports. First off, your print is going to use a little bit more material and it's going to cost a little bit more to print with. But the pattern that Slicer uses to generate these supports is pretty efficient. It's also going to increase our print times. A little bit of supports here and there aren't too bad, but sometimes when you have big, large, elaborate support structures, you may add hours to your print. It also adds another step of having to remove the supports off your part. And sometimes after removing those supports, it can leave a bit of a rough and gritty surface. They're not deal breakers, it's just a bit inconvenient, so only apply supports when you actually need them. But always tread on the side of caution, because the last thing you want is a print to fail because you didn't add enough supports. There's one more thing I want to touch on, and that is big brain ways to avoid generating supports. First of all, see if you can reorientate the part to avoid using supports. The easiest example is getting that T, flipping it upside down. Bam, no more supports. Or even better, lie it down flat on the bed. Good design in the CAD modeling stage can also help you avoid supports. We'll touch on that in a later video. In Prusa Slicer, you can also split a part into two and avoid printing supports. A great example of this is trying to print a sphere. It most definitely needs supports to print, but if we do so, the bottom of it is going to have a bit of a rough surface. So we can hit the split tool here in Prusa Slicer, cut it along the middle, whack on our adaptive layer height and print it. This does mean you now have two pieces and you're going to have to glue them together at a later stage, but this method is going to get you the smoothest sphere that your printer can print. There is also another video later on gluing things together. So, recap. Supports are super helpful. You need them on steep overhangs and long bridges. They can be a bit of a pain sometimes, so be smart and see if you can reorientate, redesign, or split apart to reduce support usage. But don't be too stingy on the supports. The last thing you want is a print to fail because you didn't support it enough.